Okay, so shall we start? Dr. Selva Kumar, sir, are you there?
Yeah, I am there. Yes.
Okay. So good evening, everybody. Let me say a few words about Dr. Selva Kumar. He's been with Tamil University for some time now. More than 105 published journals, articles in journals and conference proceedings, and 20 visits abroad, 5 completed projects and two ongoing projects. He's been rendering professional service to Indian Society for Prehistoric and Quaternary Studies, and he's been treasurer of Tamil Nadu Archaeological Society. The recent 5 publications are Meteorological Traditions in South India, Indian National Science Academy sponsored project, published in Journal of History of Science. INA's Early Historic and Medieval Settlements in Lower Kaveri Valley, a preliminary report of archaeological excavations at Ambal, Nagapattinam district, Tamil Nadu. Indian rotelet ware and associated ceramics in early historic cultural exchange networks of Indian Ocean, Journal of Indian Ocean Archaeology. A short note on the unique early medieval aqua amphora from coastal East Medinapur district, West Bengal, Journal of Asiatic Society. Ratnathin Tirunavarambangal in the inscriptions of Brodveswara Temple, Travancore stone beds of South and Southeast Asia Archaeology. Ethnographic and Global Connections, IIT Gandhinagar, Aryan Books International. So these are his recent 5 publications. I must say Dr. Selva Kumar is one of the well-established historians today in our country. His presence is everywhere. In fact, recently the virtual Indian History Congress is one of the main speakers in History Congress. Dr. Selva Kumar.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Srinivasa Rao, and I am indeed happy to be in this platform organized by Department of History, Bharathidasan University. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. Today, I am going to speak about early historic maritime trade in South India. So I will share my PowerPoint presentation and then speak on from there.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll try again. Yeah, now it is appearing. Yes. I hope you can see this PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, we are seeing it now. Yeah.
From the beginning. Yeah, right. I'll start. Early historic maritime trade in South India. That is the topic of today. So before going into the topic, I thought I would introduce the time context. We are dealing with the period, say, roughly about mid-first millennium BC. That is the period, and that's the beginning. Actually, its terminal comes up to 300 CE. So the early historic is generally placed between, say, I'll just make a small correction. So here, CE up to 300 CE. That is the time period, early historic. There are debates about the beginning of this particular phase. Some scholars tend to place this around 600 BCE. Some scholars tend to place it around 300 BCE. Recent dates from the site of Kiradi has presented a case for early beginning of Brahmi, Tamil Brahmi. So we need to work further on this chronology. Chronology is something which is not final in archaeology as well as history. We need to revise, especially when we are concerned with the prehistoric and proto-historic and early historic cultures. As we do more research, we'll be able to focus better. And the period before this is called Iron Age in South India. And that begins somewhere around the second millennium BC. Nowadays, researchers tend to place the beginning of Iron Age somewhere in the mid second millennium BC. That is to say 1500 BCE down to the beginning of early historic. As far as South Indian archaeology and history is concerned, I feel we need to do more research. Currently, we have been, pursuing the old issues, basically teaching and researching on the old issues. We have not really understood the formative phase of South Indian culture. This is something very important because the South Indian culture as such, what you call, the more contemporary states of Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu and Kerala, the cultural beginning perhaps started in the Neolithic or in the Mesolithic age. We have not undertaken sufficient scientific research in understanding the Neolithic culture of South India. There are studies, definitely there are studies, but we need to undertake more research on this particular phase. Then, come after the Neolithic, we have late Chalcolithic age, then comes the Iron Age, then comes the early historic. So, I would argue the foundation for South Indian, the cultural formation in South India was laid around 3000 BCE when these Neolithic communities emerged. We need to do more research. Now we are talking of cultural space. I define the temporal space, what I mean early historic, roughly from 600 BCE to 300 CE. That is defined as early historic, and that follows Iron Age. Then we have cultural space. So when we study Indian history or even Tamil Nadu's history or South Indian history, we cannot study the space in isolation. In fact, India as an entity emerged much later in history. If we want to understand early history of India, we need to go for Afro-Eurasian world connections. We need to understand the history of Indian Ocean. Indian Ocean is very important. Similarly, our connections with the Southeast Asia, East Asia, West Asia, and Central Asia, and Africa. It extends back into the prehistoric time. We cannot just focus, understand the culture only in Tamil Nadu or only in South India or only in South Asia or India. So we need to study Indian history from two perspectives, one from local or regional perspectives, and second from a Indian Ocean or Afro-Eurasian world perspective. And we have been having intensive maritime interaction right from the time of Indus Valley civilization, say somewhere around 3000 BC or even before. In addition to that, we have been having evidence for movement and migration of people across these entire area. So therefore, we need to look at either Tamil Nadu history or Kerala history or Karnataka, Andhra or South India or Indian history. One from local regional perspective, second from Afro-Eurasian perspective. That's what I'm trying to argue. Now we will go into the definition of trade. There is a definition and other conceptual ideas related to trade discussed by McNabb. I have reproduced here. Basically, people were involving in trade of goods and services, this can be divided into domestic trade, foreign trade. Under the domestic trade, we have wholesale, retail, and then we have import trade, export trade, and transship trade. So the transship trade is very important. If you take the early historic settlements in South India, port center, transshipment trade was one of the factors. Why Mussoorie or Musuris on the Kerala coast became important because it was not only depending upon the local pepper trade, it was also a transshipment point for entire Andhra, Tamil Nadu, Orissa, and Bengal, and also China and Southeast Asia products. So basically, Musuris had two functions. One, to gather the local produce. Second, to act as a transshipment point for the goods and commodities produced in the Bay of Bengal realm, or the east coast of India, or Southeast Asia and China. So we need to look into this. Therefore, what we cannot take Archimedo as something related to east coast only. Same way, Musuris was not something confined to Kerala. Its interaction or networks linked across the Afro-Eurasian world or Indian Ocean world. That we should not forget. Therefore, all these coastal ports had two kinds of contacts: interland contacts and foreland contacts. Sometimes this extended further beyond in the Indian Ocean region. Now we will understand the importance of Indian Ocean region as well as Afro-Eurasian world. Here, I would like to discuss some of the concepts like network, trade and exchange systems. Sometimes you may feel these are all jargon, but definitely when we want to discuss history or archaeology, and mainly the processes related to history and archaeology, we need these kind of terms like network. No settlement cannot be seen in isolation. Similarly, no individual cannot be seen in an isolation. It is a collection, it is a community, it is a social or religious network or a trade network that powers the interaction. Therefore, the concept of network is very important. Similarly, trade and exchange system, when we talk about trade and exchange, it has multiple meanings. So basically, we are dealing with the landscapes, sites, and localities. We cannot just say in India, the contemporary context, only Bombay or Kolkata or Chennai or Hyderabad, Bangalore, or the major cities are important. They are just the nodes. They are part of the network. So therefore, we need to have a landscape approach where the basic resources for the trade, raw material for the trade comes from. So therefore, this concept of network and the exchange system, the term system is also very important because these kind of terms allow us to discuss the processes. Similarly, trade routes, they are like arteries linking major settlements and hinterland. So this is also very important. Trade routes are very much part of the network. They help the interaction. So the interactions and trade basically happens through network. When we talk about trade, the definition of trade already we saw. The trade, it is not in the modern sense. We are seeing in a different sense in the early period. It is not only trade, people also had reciprocal exchanges, about which we will come later. And then agencies. Agencies are also important factor in these historical or cultural relationships. We have communities of producers. For example, if you look at the early Tamil literature, you see the shepherds collecting the raw material, precious gems, and then passing on to the traders. How these trade network functions? Basically, they have suppliers. They have people who are collecting the raw material, who are producing, and that is being handed over to the middleman. Then they transport it to the central market. So we have communities of producers, traders who act as intermediaries, small-scale traders, and then major traders, and then consumers. Basically, this network is activated by the agencies. The network is a kind of conceptual framework within which the agencies are acting, like our heart and brain. We have a lot of basically, I want to explain this for the student. We have a lot of arteries, blood carrying. So whereas the heart and the brain act as a kind of nodes. Similarly, these agencies and these networks, they work together. And these networks can be divided into social network, economic or commercial network, political network, cultural or ideological network. When we talk about cultural or ideological networks, we have Buddhism and Jainism spreading across in this period. So they were also important factor in the development of trade activities. Actually, we need not study trade alone. There are other factors. It was not only trade. When we are looking from a modern economic historical perspective, we can't reduce the interaction into trade or exchange. It's much more deeper. Here you can see Carl Polanyi discusses about three kind of exchanges. Basically, some scholars say that we should not use the word trade for an early period exchange. It should be exchange. Here, Polanyi talks about reciprocity, redistribution, and market exchange. Actually, when we talk about trade, we are dealing with market exchange. Reciprocity is something which we give and take. It happens within the local community. Most of the local kind of interactions happens this way. Because I remember when I was a child, my relatives used to come from, say, 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers. They used to bring the vegetable that was produced in their farm. Even today it happens, Then we give something back. So these kind of exchanges happened among communities in the early times, and redistribution is one form of distribution exchange in which people contribute to the chief, and then chief gives it to the other people who are coming to him. This is spoken in Sangam literature elaborately. These two types of exchanges are early period exchanges, primitive. They are based on trust and confidence, and also there is no economic profit involved in it. But market as a third type of exchange is something different from it is something based on the value. Here there is no relationship. It is more commercial, more towards the commercial aspect. So when we talk about early historic period, all these three type of exchanges existed. Mainly we are focusing on the third type of relationship. So we also need to look into the developments in early historic South India. What happened somewhere around 300 BCE? Mauryan rule was very strong here because we have a lot of Mauryan inscriptions, Ashokan inscription in Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh. Then slightly later, we have Satavahanas in the post-Mauryan context, Satavahanas emerging in Maharashtra, Andhra, Karnataka region, and also several other chiefs and Chera Chola Pandyas in extreme south in Tamil Nadu and Kerala, and also introduction of script happens, Tamil and other languages in this region develop script, and development of Buddhism and Jainism takes place, for which we have a lot of evidence in Andhra Pradesh. We'll take Andhra Pradesh. If you look at Andhra Pradesh, we have huge evidence for Buddhist network. A lot of stupas have been excavated, and these stupas are in a sense continuity of Megalithic way of worship. So the new ideology takes its root in Andhra Pradesh, much more than what it was in Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu, there are two potential sites where we have evidence of Buddhist architecture and remains, mainly Kaveri Pumpattinam and also Kanchipuram. These are the two known sites. They are slightly later in date. So this Buddhist network was very important, and this was very powerful, and Buddhism was supported by the traders extensively. We also need to take into consideration the Sri Lankan connections. This trade network actually linked the entire Bay of Bengal, going from Bengal region and Southeast Asia, and linked to Sri Lanka. So this is one important ideology that supported the trade activity. And there are several ports and settlements in Andhra Pradesh. We have Kalingapattinam, Shaligundam, Amravati. These are all slightly hinterland sites, and Satanikota, Kottapattanam. And recently, Gotipurolu has been excavated by Dr. Sri Lakshmi from Archaeological Survey of India. So we have, I will look at some of these images from the site of Gotipurolu, which is in Tamil Nadu, Andhra border, which is very close to this Noid pit. And these are some of the images. I just wanted to show you the kind of material culture that are found in the early settlements. In the early historic time, we find the evidence for the use of brick architecture, burnt brick, and also roof tiles. And in addition to that, we have these conical jars. These are some of the typical material. Similarly, Karnataka part also, we have important development at the sites like Honavra and also probably Mangalore. They emerged as important ports. We have not done much work in the coastal area of Karnataka. We need to do more. And sites like Banavasi, Vadgan, Madhapur, Sanati, we have a lot of evidence for these early historic development. Roman coins have been found. So, in a sense, both Karnataka, Andhra, and also Tamil Nadu, Kerala, all of them witnessed a kind of urbanization somewhere around 300 BCE, 500 BCE to 300 BCE. So this is one important development. So these communities transformed, the South Indian communities transformed from megalithic burial builder to a kind of settlers in some contexts, mainly where agriculture took its roots and Buddhism had an important role, and trade was one of the options for some of these people who were traveling frequently. Then coming to Tamil Nadu, we have these sites of Arikamedu, Kaveri Pumpattinam, Adahankulam, Korkai, and in Kerala we have this famous Musiris Pattanam, and some of these sites are with question marks because they have not been identified. So basically we are looking at the development of urban centers and key centers in the hinterland as well as in the coastal areas, and this is the Indian Ocean. So here we see this network which mainly uses the monsoon, developing somewhere around 300 BCE or even before, but this network became stronger from say 100 BCE, where mainly after the conquest of Egypt by the Romans, and also the blockage of hinterland route, the so-called Silk Route by the Parthians, encouraged the contact through the sea. So that is how this maritime interaction became important from say 1st century BCE. So now we will come to the trade-related political scenario, entire South India. How do you visualize South India? As I said, political powers had strengthened. We have Shatavahana's controlling Andhra, Karnataka region, and also some parts of northern Tamil Nadu. And in addition to that, there were also small chiefs. We cannot say that Shatavahanas were in control of the entire territory. We have probably smaller chiefs controlling smaller towns. And in the case of Tamil Nadu, we have Chera Chola Pandya controlling certain regions, and they were fighting among themselves to ascertain their political authority over territory. And then we have evidence for industrial production at many of these settlements, and we have development of local trade, and intermediaries emerged. We have clear reference in the Tamil Brahmi inscriptions to Vanigan or Nigama or Nigamato, which suggests that the traders were one important agencies or communities who were contributing to the exchange of commodities, because these intermediaries are very important in the long distance trade. You cannot expect normal producer or a community in a village to exchange the product. There is a necessity for intermediaries. Only through the intermediaries we can develop long distance trade. Local trade is easy. Local trade or local exchange is easy without the intermediaries. But in the case of long distance, even within Indian trade, this intermediaries were important. And some of the Buddhist and Jain traders were part of this system. We can very much see that, and these people were also controlling the production. When you say, production of textile, production of other metal, they were controlled by these nigamas or niyamam. There are in the Sangam literature also there are references to niyama modo. So probably these communities set up the industrial establishment and produced a lot of goods. And we have clear evidence of long distance trade, which is attested by the Greco-Roman texts as well as our own Tamil and other literature. We have evidence for coins as well as barter. We have punch mark coins, Roman coins, and local coins like Chera, Shatavagna coins appearing. We have evidence for Indian Ocean interaction, religious network, which I already mentioned. Ports and urban centers emerge, production centers emerge. This is where archaeology becomes very important. We have a lot of texts, say Periplus and Ptolemy and Pliny's writing. But these archaeological sites actually they supply evidence for the existence of the urban centers and the basic infrastructure, production facilities. That is why archaeology is very important in understanding the early historic trade in terms of material perspective. And long distance trade routes and navigation formed part of the network that linked the important key sites. So that is the kind of situation. Now, when we look at the Sangam literature, which is one of the important sources for understanding the development, we can see that there existed different ethnic groups. It was an open society, some kind of social distinction, rudimentary social hierarchy existed, and also conflicts and clashes existed, and we have evidence of poor farmers. So there is some disparity existed, which was actually supported by this local chiefs. We can see that several research scholars have worked on the maritime trade. Warmington, Wheeler, all that names you must be familiar with. I'll not go into the details. So coming to the Iron Age, these are some of the megalithic monuments. I just wanted to show you some images. These cane circles, cyst burials, dolmens, umbrella stones. This is again cyst burial covered with capstone, sarcophagi, menhir. These were the monuments that were built in the Iron Age. They were also continued to be built in the early historic period. So you have on the one side urban settlements where you have brick architecture. On the other side, the entire hinterland South India was filled with these kinds of megalithic monuments. People were producing urn burial, and they were placing cornelian iron objects into the burials. So early historic urbanization is very much important because we have evidence of non-kinship based political formation. This is something important. Mainly the Chera Chola Pandya, the Movendas, and also Shatavaganas, they were creating a political formation which was not kinship based. Unlike the Iron Age chiefdom society, we know about chiefdom society where kinship was an important kind of political organization that was probably existed in the Iron Age, where Uday Ravimurthy has analyzed the megalithic burials and has come to a conclusion that chiefdom level social organization existed in the Iron Age. In the early historic time, we have different kind of political formation, which cannot be strictly called as a state. We have very strong evidence for state formation only from the later 3rd, 4th century CE or later. But whereas in this period, we have some kind of political formation, it is better to use the term political formation rather than the state. As I said in introduction of writing, long distance interaction, coins, craft and industrial production, all that is part. These two maps show the important megalithic site. So we also see a lot of settlements coming up in the early historic period, and you find these kinds of writing on ceramics developing in this period, early historic period. This is what characterizes early historic period. You also get these kind of metal rings with inscriptions, and these are some of the important sources you might be familiar with. I need not stress Strabo's geography, Periplus, Pliny's natural history, Ptolemy's geography, and Mussini's papyrus, and also Chariton, which is a comedy play which talks about these interactions, and also Pittingarian table. And these texts are very important because many of these texts are not Indian. Basically, they are Greek in origin, Greco-Roman in origin. They clearly suggest that this part of South India was open to the Indian Ocean world, and people were traveling. And this is Pitigarian table, which is actually a map. This is Sri Lanka, and this
Professor,
is
we are not
yes.
able to see. We are not able to see the change in the slides. So can you
Okay,
reshare?
okay,
Can you
okay,
reshare?
okay. I think yeah.
Yeah.
When
As well as can
okay,
you put it in full screen user?
Yeah, yeah. Full
yeah.
screen,
Can
I
you,
think better. Yeah.
okay, okay. Am I sharing?
Yeah, yeah. It's sharing, but it's actually gone into a sideline. I think it should be
Okay, okay,
shared
right.
again. We'll be able
Okay,
to see in full screen, I think.
okay, okay, right.
Please reshare it.
Okay, okay,
Yeah. Now we are able to see. Earlier images you have showed that also we
okay,
could not see.
okay, okay, right, right. You saw this?
Yeah. We are seeing it now.
Yeah, right. These are some of the pottery with the names inscribed on it. These are all individual names. Probably writing was introduced at that point of time. People were very curious to write their names on the pottery. In addition to that, they also indicated the individual possession. So we get these kind of writing on pottery at several early historic settlements. You also get these kind of ornaments with individual name. This was found at Karur. We have all these sources for this particular period. And these Greco-Roman sources are very important because they tell us that South India was open to the Indian Ocean world and people were traveling across, for which you also get evidence in the early Tamil literature, which mentions about these Romans and Greco-Romans and Westerners generally as Yavanas. Yavana was a very common term used in the Sanskrit, Prakrit, as well as Tamil text. And this particular map is very important. It presents the map of India, one of the oldest representation of India. What you see as Thambapani or Tambrapani is Sri Lanka. Here we have Musaris and Templum Agasti, probably a temple of Augustus. So this is something very important source of India. So in the image of India had gone out outside by that time of say 1st century BC AD period. So we have Sangam literature also. So we have evidence of internal trade and external trade which are being spoken in the literature. This is where, as a student of history, we need to excavate literature. We need to excavate literature in the sense we have to go into the Sangam poems, read those words, and interpret their meanings. So when we look at the Sangam literature, we have a lot of evidence for these kind of activities. We need to re-look at the literature, and also the literature talks about womaners who are selling salt, women folk who moved in bullock carts. So all these representations are found, and you have these major settlements in the form of coastal towns and then hinterland centers emerging. And this is a recently explored sites in the Periyar and Vaigai river valley. You have Kidadi somewhere here, and you have so many settlements of this period with the black and red ware. This also I have already mentioned how this Purananuru 56 poem that talks about the wine of the Yamanas offered in metal cups to the Pandyan king, and also Agananuru 149, which talks about the Yamanas, ships of Yamanas that came into the river Periyar, beating the white foam with metal and gold and left with pepper. This is a classic kind of expression found in Sangam literature, which highlights the main commodity of metal, that is gold or other objects that came through these ships, Yamana ships, and then they left with pepper, one of the bulk commodity that was exported at that point of time. So here again we come to the Pattinapalai. So the poet is very well aware of the goods. Now, if you visit any of the markets, and the moment you visit a market, you can, if you go to the Tiruchi Gandhi market, as soon as you enter, you can see the flavor of the market. You can see the people, getting goods and shifting and transporting. Probably the Sangam age poets, they were basically ethnographers, anthropologists who were, documenting the happenings. So here, this Pattinapalai, Kadiyallur Urthirangannanar speaks the majestic horses that came to the sea. The black Neerin Vanda Nimirvari Puraviyum, Kalin Vanda Karungari Mudayum. I will explain this in English. The black pepper bags that were carried out by the animals, gems and gold from the northern hills, sandal and aloe from the western hills, pearls from the southern sea, coral from eastern sea, probably Southeast Asia, goods from Ganga, and commodities from Kaveri, the food from Needham, that is Sri Lanka, products from Karakum. So here, while composing the Pattinapalai, Kadiyallur Urthirangannanar beautifully understand the network. This is what we call in archaeology as well as historical analysis as network. So how goods were coming to these main ports. This is in the context of Kaveri Pupattinam. Also, we get a lot of references to ports of Korkai, Kondi, Virai, Munturai. Virai is identified with Arikamedu. Nearby, there is Virampattinam. So there are also a reference to Yamana lands. I will not go into the detail. Purananuru 343, which talks about the exchange that is happening in the site of around the site of Musri, where the fisher folk come in the watercraft of Ampi. Ampi was one of the type of watercraft, and they exchange the fish for rice, and that rice is heaped on the ship or the watercraft, and they resemble like the houses on the land. Similarly, houses look like the ship. So here, poet uses a kind of expression to describe the narration. Though it is exaggerated, it clearly talks about the kind of exchange that took place. Periplus, mainly Periplus 53, section 53 and 54, it talks about the Tamidagam or Limerick. It talks about Musaris, Nelkinta, and the distance and all the commodities. So this how come Greco-Roman text talks about South India? What is the necessity of producing this text? What is the reason behind this? Basically, there was a demand for this information. In that, at that point of time, this was a navigational guide for the sailers and navigators and the merchants. So therefore, they produced this particular navigational guide so that it is like our tour guide. We go to any tourist place, we buy many of these tourist guides. Similarly, it was produced as a text for the navigators, wherein they were giving all kinds of details. And also it talks about the Periplus is very important text. It gives you the Indian Ocean perspectives, and also it talks about the commodities that were traded, native spices, drugs and aromatics, and all that, pepper, malapatram and gems, onyx, diamonds, sapphires, all these goods and textiles, probably cotton cloth and garments. Silk product probably came from China, and also ivory. Ivory was also exported. And what are the archaeological sources for this? We get evidence of Indian goods not only at the Indian sites, but also in Egypt. This is the site of Bernike, where they have found a lot of material. They have found Tamil Brahmi graffito, which reads as this one is Kanan, Chathan. This was found at Qusair al-Qadim. Qusair al-Qadim is here. This is Bernike. Qusair al-Qadim is Mios Hormuz. This is where. And at that point of time, the people were using the monsoon, and they were reaching as far as the Red Sea. At that time, there was no Suez Canal linking Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea. So the ships, Indian ships, used to go to either Bernike or Mios Hormuz. And from there, the goods were transported across the Nile, eastern desert to the Nile. And then from there, they were taken to Alexandria. Then they went to the site of Rome. So this Bernike is the view on the left. You see, this is where the Indian ships went. And at this side, we have evidence for Indian merchants. These two were found at the site of Qusair al-Qadim. This reads Panay Puri. So typically, Indian traders moved there. Similarly, Indian pottery has been found. Then this is from the site of Bernike. This inscription reads Kotra Puman, and at this site they found 7.5 pepper in a jar. So this jar was probably in Indian in origin, and they were exporting pepper. So here we are identifying the network based on the material culture. These are typically Indian pottery. The archaeologists use typology for understanding the material culture. So the Indian pottery is identifiable by its shape. As you know, potters all over the world produce pottery according to some style and design. Suppose I show you this particular bottle, it has typical size, style, and shape. If you look at this typology, it is very important in archaeology. You can see typology is applicable everywhere. You take the case of Tamil spoken in Chennai, Tamil spoken in Coimbatore, Tamil spoken in Madurai and Tirunelveli. Each has its flavor. Similarly, you go to South India, the sambar or idli or rasam, in each region is so different. You look at the films produced in 1940s down to today, the kind of dress, if you look at the movies produced in 1980s, there will be bell bottom of 29 inch. So archaeologists reduce everything into typology, script, letter, everything, language, material, everything can be reduced into typology, and this typology can act as a cultural signature. For example, a way of making fish curry in Andhra, chicken curry, mutton curry in Andhra, Kerala, Karnataka, North India is entirely different. So that is what gives flavor to the culture. The same typology can be extended to script of some Tamil script of 8th century, 9th century, 1st century, 11th, 12th, 20th century is entirely different. Same way, the ceramic vessel form, they can to some extent tell us a particular region. It can serve as a cultural signature. So this is what archaeologists use for a definition of the culture, specifically in a particular region. Same way, achar, if you go to Urgai or pickle of different parts of India has different flavor. So this is something, essence of culture or a kind of typology that we see, which are used for classification. Similarly, clothes, dress, and everything, there is something reflected which we identify as a cultural signature. So Indian ceramic vessels will have definitely certain idiosyncratic features which define as Indian. So on the basis of that, we have identified Indian pottery. Then they go on doing scientific analysis, looking at the scientific their composition, mineral composition. They identify that these pottery went from India. We also have evidence of printed cloth. This is probably from Gujarat, found at the site of Bernike. As I said already, at the site of Bernike in Egypt, they found 7.5 kilo pepper in a jar, which probably went from India, coconut, teak remains, rouletted ware, one type of pottery, and also Tamil Brahmi inscription. Another site in Oman called Kor Rori, which is also known as Sumuram. This is famous for frankincense. Frankincense in Tamil, it is Kunguliyam. In Malayalam, it is Kundirikam. It is used in flavoring, mainly it is used for perfume. It is also offered in worship. If you go to Thiruvayaru, you can see people offering Kunguliyam in a kind of in a kind of vessel which is kept outside the main temple. And there was one of the saint called Kunguliya Kalaya Nayanar. So Kunguliyam was used for worship in the temples, and you have evidence of this particular center acting as a main port for frankincense trade. There we have evidence for a name of a person with Nandai Kiran. So this name Nandai, it is broken. It could be Kannadai, and Kiran is a very much a Tamil name. Similarly, a gold touchstone has been identified with the Tamil Brahmi inscription in Kuan Lukpat in Thailand, which reads as Perum Patan Kal. Patan means Patan is a gold worker, and this Kal is very typical. It is 3rd, 4th century. So clearly that Indian craftsmen were moving across the Indian Ocean. Similarly, Indian names have also been found in some of the pottery found in Phuket. In Sri Lanka also we have evidence for these connections. We have Panatava and Anakodai, Tissa Maharama inscriptions. Then coming to Archimedo, Archimedo is one important settlement which was excavated by Mortimer Wheeler, and it has produced evidence of urbanization. This is what happens in this point of time. People were developing these kind of centers and they were producing. I'll skip some of the slides. And this is an excavated site where we have brick architecture. So brick architecture was introduced in the early historic period. This is how we define early historic, different from Iron Age. Early historic, we have evidence of brick architecture, script, coins, and everything. So clearly we have evidence for transformation happening, and these what we call as urban centers emerging. Kirdi is one such center. Kirdi is one such town. Now, if you take Tamil Nadu, we have Madurai, we have Coimbatore, Salem, Tiruchi, Dindirkal. At the same way, at that point of time, we had these settlements. Now you can ask a question: why Tiruchi developed where it was? Why Madurai developed where it is now? Why Madurai has to develop at that point? Why Tiruchi has to develop at that point? Why Thanjavur has to develop? There is a reason behind. There is a geographical factor like water availability, river Kaveri, and also the junction of the trade routes. Madurai cannot be there near Nagapattinam or near the coast. Madurai is a hinterland center ideally located in the Vaigai riverbed. Same way Kaveri, same way Karur. So there is a reason for the emergence of these towns in the early historic time, which we study as part of settlement pattern studies in archaeology. And these key settlements emerged as urban centers because they were the point where markets were located. They were at the junction of the trade routes. By locating, a chief could control that area by sitting at Tiruchirappalli, like Urayur and Karur, Cheras and Madurai. So there is a strategic reason for these centers emerging, and why Tiruchi emerged even today. There is a historical and cultural geographical reason behind that. So this is what we study in human geography or historical geography. So why a settlement rises, why a particular town emerges. So there is a historical factor behind the rise. Similarly, so you see Archimedo, these traders came, and next there is Pondicherry now. Why Pondicherry emerged? Why Nagapattinam emerged? So there is a historical reason which continues. You can see. Similarly, the site of Archimedo produces certain artifacts like rouletted bag. This was one of the traded ceramics. This is an India-produced pottery, which has been found from, say, Egypt down to Vietnam. Roman amphora. Earlier we saw that in the Sangam poem talks about the Roman wine being offered to Pandya king. We find the actual object. So these excavations help us to understand the material culture and the network and the trade and the agencies. We have a graffito, we have evidence of conch shell bangles all across, chariot kind of seal impression, Tamil Brahmi, evidence of gold. We also find evidence of gold which is not locally available, and also we have a glass produced. So all these industries emerged in the early historic time. This is Adakankulam. This is probably Sri Lankan in origin. It also suggests that people from Sri Lanka, Andhra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, they were all moving. If you look at the Sangam literature, you get all that evidence which talks about the hero moving away in search of earning wealth. Similarly, the Roman coins have been found at the site of Adakankulam. And again, we have Terra Sigillata. And here, this is an interesting seal impression from Adakankulam, where there is a lady carrying an amphora, and opposite to that, there is a man holding a kind of lamp, menorah lamp, which is associated with Jewish kind of tradition, which is again interesting. So obviously, that people were moving, interacting in this period. Again, there is a ship graffito. from Arhanpulam, and these kind of beads, cornelian is not available locally, it came from Gujarat. So these port towns became industrial centers where people produce textiles, glass beads, copper, gold, stone. So they were kind of mini special economic zone like what we have at Trichy or in Chennai. So this, imagine, this happened 2000 years ago. They were primarily controlled by entrepreneurs or merchants who are controlling the trade. So we get material evidence for that. We also get these kind of tanks made of bricks which could have been used for textile production, and also these ring wells. So we get different kinds of settlements, towns, or emerging in the early historic times, and these kind of graffiti, these kind of objects which were used as dyes, and this one is quartz ornament, earlobe has been found, and this is the site of Pattanam where we identified the Musiris. And here we get pottery produced in West Asia, and these potteries are very typically distinct. They have glaze on the exterior surface, and we also have this West Asian torpedo jar with a tar coating on the interior, Roman amphora, all that found at the site of Pattanam. I'll skip because we don't have much time. This is again terra sigillata, pottery produced in Italy or West Asia, that is found in these sites. Probably they came with the Yamanas and they were meant as gift for the local elites and traders. This is roulette ware, again Indian made pottery, and this is the distribution of amphora. So this tells us a lot of things, how these settlements functioned as industrial centers in the early historic time. You can see very beautiful ornaments. These were all exported and also locally consumed by the elites. Metal objects, copper coin. So the metal probably came through the Roman trade because in South India copper is not much available. The trade was one important factor that supplied goods and services. So we needed goods. Even recently, when India had a problem with China, they stopped the import of certain goods and the industries were affected. So when the world is open and things are freely moving, you get raw material. So this was the connectivity that existed. About 2000 years ago, people could get metals and all that. Look at this particular small ornament which was found at Pattanam. This design is of a miniature amphora. Again, it tells us how these ideas and technology moved. It was not a closed society. It was much open society where people moved, ideas moved, goods moved, and things were producing. That we are finding in archaeological context, evidence of script. These are, of course, later evidence. We also found a wharf at Pattanam and a boat made of single log of wood and brick architecture. So all these appear, you excavate everywhere in South India. This is what you find in the early historic settlements, roof tiles, and sometimes toilets, and so many other features. Organic remains we found, at the site of Pattanam, teak, teak, and also anjali, and coconut, and pepper, and grape seeds. A lot of material, kathirikai, or what is known as eggplant, Bendeka, lady's finger, elaka, elachi. All these organic remains were excavated at this site. In addition to that, they also found Fortuna interview. Again, this idea of long distance connections influencing the ornaments. This was one Greco-Roman ornament that is found at Pattanam, and many more things were excavated at this site. Again, a lion pendant, and again a gold ornament in the form of an axe. So you get this was a spindle hole which was used for making thread from cotton. Evidence of cotton industry is also found. So we get a lot of such material, and looking into the data from literature, we get evidence for pottery making, iron working, copper, bronze. These are the industries I was talking about, weaving, carpentry. So these industries powered the interaction. So trade cannot happen without these production. So basically, natural resources, spices, and produced goods were exchanged. And for the early historic development, it is not only maritime or long distance trade, local consumption, local trade was also important. Therefore, we get three kinds of exchange relationship in the early historic time: on local or internal exchange within Tamil region, second, long distance within South Asia, third, further long distance with the Roman Empire. So all these contributed to the early historic development. So I have presented the references in Tamil literature. I'll not take much of your time. I'll quickly look into that weaving industry, reference for weaving in the literature, where sometimes it talks about women who were involved in weaving, and sometimes widows are called as paruthi pendir, cotton women. So now you can see in the villages today, sometimes even the old persons are selling and they are involved in economic production. There is nothing like retirement age. I have seen, even there is a news that in Uttar Pradesh there was an 80-year-old person who was selling fruits. It was in the paper news recently. So different kinds of people were producing and contributing. That is how things were moving, and we have description of the nature of the textile in Sangam literature. Evidence for textile has been found at the site of Kodumanal. These are the sites we saw already, like weaving, and these are the detailed description. I'll not go into the detail. There's so much of evidence for this textile: iron smelting, copper bronze working, jewelry making, glass bead making. So all these industries flourished in the early historic time. Shell bangle working. Same way, all these specialists lived, and they are spoken in Tamil literature. How these sites could be, we always talk about Kirdi, or these are all bigger settlements. In fact, Tamil Nadu had small villages, medium towns, and bigger settlements. Ambal was a medium settlement that we excavated. We work on correlating the literature with the archaeological evidence. Nangur, these centers become nadus in the medieval time. And sites like Archimedu, Pattanam, Kiradi, Urayur, they are all category 3 urban centers. So when we talk about early historic period, we should think of the political centers like Urayur, Thanjavur, Madurai, and Kiradi like production centers, Archimedu, Adayankulam, Pattanam, or Kalinga Pattanam, or Pannavara as port cities. So we have different kinds of settlements in that period. We need to look into that. And similarly, the wealth that came from those cities, they went into the megalithic burials. This is from the site of Mutrepalayam and Sutukeni. Mutrepalayam and Sutukeni, they found a lot of ornaments, gold ornaments, which are found in the missing image. So clearly, the wealth through these ports went to the megalithic burials. We have several other settlements, and also in the remote areas. I did work on the Palians in the hill areas of Western Ghats and Varshanada, Andipatti Hill. They were honey gatherers. So such communities also participated in the Indian Ocean trade. So you have specialized traders, pastoralists, agricultural people, and hunter gatherers who are contributing to the trades by supplying goods. And also we get these connections with northern India in the form of certain pottery, and Roman connection is exhibited by these objects, and also by literature. So you get a lot of such evidence. So coming to the conclusions, we can clearly see after 3rd century BCE there was spurt in development, mainly long distance trade. I would suggest that development of spirit be before 3rd century BCE. So we cannot view the Iron Age society as static. So as indicated by this evidence from Kiradi, probably around 6th century BCE, there emerged all these towns. These towns started growing. By 3rd century BCE, they became more urbanized, especially after 1st century BCE, the activities were brisk, and perhaps from about 3rd century CE, there was a decline. That was because of long fall in long distance trade, and also crafts specialization, urbanization, specialized traders, and everything was seen in this period, say 3rd century BCE to say first, second century CE. So this is reflected in the literature as well as archaeological evidence. If you look at the Tamil Brahmi inscription, we get a lot of activities. So clearly, the long distance trade was a factor boosting the growth, but it was not only long distance trade. Uh, the society was developed internally to a sufficient ground that craft specialization in an early form existed. And this craft specialization, local consumption provided a boost to the development. And whereas this long distance trade, it was something like a topping on the cake, like icing on the cake. It actually supported. So once that long distance trade declined, all these coastal towns and big urban centers slightly declined. They did not go completely out of the picture. There were activities because we get fourth, fifth century, when these settlements became smaller, and that is where these agriculture focus on agriculture shifted from third, fourth century. Then we have the arrival of or predominance of Jainism, Buddhism. Then we know the history from 6th century, the Bhakti movement, emergence of re-emergence of Pallavas and Pandya, something new, something kind of a transformation happens after 3rd century CE. We know about the Pulamurichi Kalvetu, definitely representing a new kind of phase happening. So this early historic maritime trade was an important factor. This gave birth for the first urbanization as far as South India is concerned. As far as North India or in South Asia, the first urbanization was during the period of the industrial civilization. What we can call this as a second urbanization, which also emerged all across South Asia. And in Tamil Nadu and in South India, perhaps it started from 6th century BCE, and then it reached the peak in the 1st century BCE, and then perhaps it declined, leading to something like a feudalism after 3rd, 4th century CE. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Selva Kumar.
Yes.
So we are very happy that we are able to have some idea on the topic of issue that we choose to talk about, the importance of maritime trade, the oceanic trade in the development of the early South India. The networks of trade and the agencies and the role of some of the ports and as the transit points for the development of urban centers, and the cultural flow through the over the ocean and within the internal cultures. So it's very well explained to us. So I open this entire talk for discussion. People can type your questions or directly ask. You can ask also. You can also ask in Tamil. Dr. Selva Kumar will be able to answer.
If they want, they can ask in Tamil also.
No yeah. That's that I told them that you can also ask in Tamil.
Hello.
Yes.
Sir, very good evening, sir.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation, sir. Very valuable information indeed. Well, myself, I'm Prasanna, PhD research scholar in history from Bhardas University. Well, I have two questions. Let me ask one by one. The first question is, well, in regarding to the maritime trade, the compass was invented by Chinese. But even before the invention of compass, we do follow the maritime trade activities, both internal and external. So wonder how our ancient people find the direction without compass, and what are the ancient techniques they have followed. For example, now we have magnometer, GPS. Wonder what did they have, and suppose, for example, if the traders lost their way in the middle of the sea at midnight. Wonder how do they recover? One day, how did they find their way back? That's my first question, sir.
Actually, they were using the stars. They were, there are two or three methods they were using. One is the wind direction. Second is the stars. They were using the stars. We have reference to the use of stars in the Tamil literature also. There is one particular reference in the Tamil literature which mentions that the hero was to return before the Kartikai festival, but he did not return. But the lady says even if he is not returning, she would celebrate the Kartikai festival. This is something very interesting. And if you look at the some in the seal, in one of the seal, they depict a bird. So these people who were traveling probably carried a bird, and they were using it for finding the land. This is one of the method. Second is using the stars, position of the stars. They had good astronomical knowledge. So using that, they were looking at the direction. But there are cases where people had missed the directions. So some of these traders actually, were depending upon the guides. It is said the Arabs were not giving the knowledge of this monsoon wind to the Westerners. That is why it is mentioned that Hippalus was the one who discovered this monsoon. So this knowledge was not known to the Greeks, and only through Hippalus they learned the monsoon wind. So they used monsoon wind, astronomical, and the season and the stars position to identify the directions, so that we get clearly, and also birds. Only in the later period they were using certain kind of navigational aids, but in the early period they were using these means to travel. Even if you ask the people who are living in the coast, they will tell you different kinds of winds that help them to identify the movement.
Okay, sir. Suppose if that day was a black moon day, how did they used to travel? Example.
See, they basically were using the wind. They start on a particular day, so that is very clearly mentioned in the periplus. On which day you start, on which day you move. So they were basically choosing the right time of the month, and they even had a very precise calculation. So if they were following those things, it wouldn't be a problem, because the wind and as well as the currents would naturally take them.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much. And the second question is, well, usually maritime trade is somewhat risky in nature, because there may be a pirates attack, or unexpected storm, or a gigantic wave may wreck this ship. And now I have came across maritime insurance. Now when the traders lost their commodities, it was a huge loss for both the buyer as well as sellers. Now they can claim the insurance for the lost commodities. Even Britain followed that insurance activities for the slave trade from Africa to Britain. When African slave used to die, they just throw out the body of the ship, and they used to claim the money. Are there, with regarding to that reference, are there any kind of maritime insurance activities that have been followed in our ancient India? I wonder. The question is, wonder if the traders lost their whole commodities in the sea, how did they used to recover? That's the second question.
It has happened, because if you look at Manimegalai, it talks about the story of, also in Jataka stories, there are shipwrecks. It is a very risky, but as far as I know, there is nothing like insurance. But if you see the Motupalli Abhaya Sasana, earlier it was the case that whenever there was a shipwreck, the king used to take away the goods. It's Motupalli Abhaya Sasana found in Andhra Pradesh. That was one kind of encouragement for the shipwrecks and the merchants who are facing this kind of calamity. It encouraged the people that, mainly the traders who lost their ships, that the goods will be, commodities will be handed over to them. So that kind of things existed. As far as I know, there was nothing like an insurance scheme. Suppose if ship sank in the middle, it was a risky business, but if they earned, they made huge profit. So it was a very risky business, but still they were making. So we don't have any kind of, as far as I know, something like insurance. Probably that concept came in a much later period.
Thank you very much, sir.
Sir, I have a question, sir.
Yes.
Sir, actually, in China, like that Yellow River, they called that. Previously, it was a sick river. They used to say, sir. But after, I mean, in the modern period, like China, like revived that maritime trade through that river, sir. So, in fact, it reduced the cost of transporting goods also. That's why we can get cheaper products from China. I mean, in low cost. Likewise, in Tamil Nadu, we already had a route of river transport like this maritime trade. We already had, sir. What was the reason? Like I mean, now it is not there, sir. Like we almost many.
Actually, you have evidence of Buckingham Canal. That was also developed in the later period. I doubt if Tamil Nadu really had a very deep maritime, inland navigation. I think it could be attributed to, it was only seasonal. See, most of the Tamil Nadu rivers are seasonal, unlike Kerala, where they had active use of hinterland coast connectivity through the rivers. Because in Kerala, if you look at many of these areas, even British used these rivers for transporting teakwood. In Kerala, it is yes, but not in Tamil Nadu. It was only a limited extent. And also because the rivers were seasonal, and also after the construction of the dam, it was not very much viable. We don't have very much any perennial river. Maybe Ganga was, yes, Ganga was perennial, but as far as Tamil Nadu is concerned, even Kaveri was very seasonal, but people were mainly using it for seasonally. Maybe after the construction of the dam, it went out. And also, it's much easier to move along the land. That could be the reason.
Sir, we had it, no, sir. After independence, also some some boat services were there in Chennai also. Like, why it was like?
Actually, because of transformation. Even in Kerala, I remember after the they started constructing bridges across. We have a lot of inscriptions which mention about crossing the rivers. I have written a paper in which actually even for operating the sluices, Uttaramerur and many places in Thanjavur, they were operating boats within the tanks in the medieval period. So basically because of the construction of the bridges and people now change in transport, mode of transport. That could be the reason. With the construction and the automobiles, that is the main reason. So people wanted to move faster, and so automobile is much more convenient. And also the nature of cities and production, that also changed. So we maybe urbanization also. Urbanization. Same way, Nagapattinam. If you look at, actually Nagapattinam was the main center for during the colonial time. Even the Southern Railway, this Trichy Regional Railway's headquarters was in Nagapattinam. Then they found that Nagapattinam was unsuitable because of the lack of good water. There they get only salt water. They shifted that logo workshop from Nagapattinam to Tiruchirappalli. So because of various factors, things move. That also contributed to the decline of certain coastal areas. Now, if you see, you go to Tarangambadi, you can't even get a good meal. The best way to understand the history and the past, in my opinion, is to travel across. Because I've been traveling across India, we need to experience culture. So when we travel along the coastal areas, we don't get even one good place to eat a decent meal. But whereas, if you come little interior, you have cities. So now imagine how these coastal towns would have looked without the overseas contact. When when the Danish were very active, these people were coming in, the cities were flourishing. The moment they disappeared, the towns declined. So the best way to understand is to travel within India, travel within Tamil Nadu, then you can understand how people are, how culture functions. So this you can understand because of the transformation, cultural transformation, things also move. Right.
Okay, sir. Sir, actually, should India seriously think about this maritime trade even now? Like we have to learn from China. So, do you think that?
Yes. There is a lot of scope. That's what I will keep arguing, that sometime that some of these towns would definitely go into, like the way Kavaripupattinam, we never developed any of our coastal towns except maybe Thoothukudi and Chennai. All other towns, we have not. But one reason is the frequent, cyclones that are happening in the east coast. That's not the problem. But still, we can really locate the cities little away from the coast and use navigations. We have a lot of potential for moving across the Bay of Bengal and also to Arabian Sea. We can really develop, and rather we are focusing only on developing few cities like Chennai. So it is high time the government also plans some kind of development in the other areas, not only in Chennai, certain coastal areas. In fact, in the early time, people were moving towards the coast. That you can see in the case of Nagapattinam, Trankubar, and Pondicherry. Pondicherry is one good example, right? How so we can develop certain cities along the coast and also encourage coastal navigation and maritime trade. I think the government is taking a lot of efforts now. Right?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I think no more questions are there.
I guess so. Well, I would like to ask one question.
Okay.
I think you are referring to that the intermediaries, both in the external trade and the internal trade, getting involved in ideological positions, like so you said that they were contributing to the development of Buddhism or spread of Buddhism.
Right.
So if that is the case, is that trade, the intermediary subject to some sort of a politicization, or they cannot be neutral, no, in a sense?
Yeah, they were not neutral. Some of these texts were probably produced by even these people where they had knowledge of producing texts. Some of the Sangam poets, like Kulamanihan. So these traders were also poets. And they definitely had a kind of affiliation, and you find these people donate to the Jains. So it's a kind of dual role as moving.
So
this religion, it gave some kind of security. Even now, if you see any of the businessmen who are in Southeast Asia, so this is their spiritual need. They immediately build a temple there. They need some kind of icon. Maybe because as the other person asked a question that it is very risky to travel, especially in a context where you live, and also piracy was there, and also like even today it happens. People blackmail, and there are people extort money. So at that point in time, they have to secure, and sometimes. I have seen even in the way Buddhist establishment, this was a way that gave them some support. In a way that also, blocked the role of commercial role of these people. They were also contributing to, spirituality and ideological position. A temple. That is why wherever the traders existed, a temple or a mosque or church, they cannot be separated. So though we now see religion as separate, you see wherever there are these settlements of traders, you find either a mosque or a temple or a church. So they are very much interlinked. Even these, why these colonial traders, they came only for trade, but why these Jesuits also came along with them? You have a lot of evidence for the employment of Brahmin priests in ritualization in Southeast Asia.
Yeah,
You know about Sheldon Pollock's, Sanskrit cosmopolis, right? This is also happens. So when traders move, religion or their ideology, basically because of their insecurity, they take their religion with them, at least for their personal security, psychological security, and then it has cascading effects.
Is the urbanization that is contributed to the trade by the trade, has it been contributing to the secularization of the urban society to some extent?
There was no secularization in a modern term. In fact, the people were secular. So these, in some time, people did not.
What I mean is that the urban folk getting busy, giving lesser importance to religion.
Urban folk definitely had a different kind of outlook. Because this idea of Yadum Ure, Yavarum Kalir cannot have developed by from a very primitive society in the sense that in a old agro-pastoral society. So Yadum Ure, Yavarum Kalir, this concept can develop only in a cosmopolitan kind of a person traveler. Maybe Kaniyan Pungun, who wrote himself, was also a trader, or maybe he might have traveled across. So these people are traveling across the country, so they got any kind of perspectives.
So about these networks that we're talking about, was there a competition for the networks when, for example, say Roman and trade?
Yes, there was competition for the network. We also get evidence in the trade, and sometimes in Baruch, there was a competition. And when a Roman ship come, sometimes the chiefs wanted the ship to come to their area, because I have seen some of the port cities. If a ship comes to a port, there will be busy activities for 2 months. There is no ship means no economic activity. So in the Periplus itself is mentioned, in some of the local chiefs they were directing. There is also Sangam poem in which the king monitored never piracy. People were trying to rob. So it was not a very well organized system. Sometimes these kind of piracy, robbers were there. The traders had to secure their commodities. Like the way today it happens near Somalia, it mentions that Usri was not a safe place because of piracy. So this existed. Sometimes there was competition. Even if you Sangam poem 149 talks about Pandya going there in West Coast attacking Chera port. So they knew that these people were interested in getting wealth. So trade was one easy way of getting wealth rather than getting all these commodities. If I give you 10 kilo of brinjal and ladies' finger, what will you do? Naturally, you will like 20 gram of gold rather than the brinjal. So these people understood the importance of trade and the so-called prestige goods or exotic commodities. So naturally, they were pricing these ships as important, because they got a bulk of the material. Same thing happened in the later period also. The clash between the Portuguese and the Islamic traders and the involvement of Zamorin is well known, because they were all trying to get control over the trade and the commodities.
So my last is actually of methodology. Say the R.J. Collingwood's dismissal of poetry is something that cannot be treated as a historical source. And D.D. Kosambi's objections or reservations on literature, especially religious literature, cannot be a source of history. But here, here looks like is it because our heavy dependence on literary evidence? Is it because of Sangam literature is not much of religious? It is mostly secular.
Yeah, it is mostly secular, and also sometimes we cannot take the literary evidence as it is. There is obviously exaggeration, but sometimes they tell us, they inform us. We have to be really critical of the literary evidence. I agree with that. At the same time, if we say we need to have only inscriptions for everything, is impossible. Same way, I think we are also ignoring oral tradition as an important source. But we need to be very careful while using literature and other forms of sources.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for helping us to understand in this very important area, emerging area. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.